zoning board of appeals meeting for September 13th, 2007. We've got minutes as a first thing, and then we've got 4 items on our agenda after that. Why don't we first try to knock off some of these historic minutes? The one for July 12th we can't do because we don't. Is that right? No, we can do this, can't we? We've got me, Joe, and Jeremy. Any corrections needed on the July 12th?
Not by me.
No. Okay, I move that they be adopted without changes.
Second.
All in favor? May 10th. And this one is me, Jeremy, and Paul. And Joe.
No objections.
This look good to you?
Yes.
Move these be accepted, May 10th be accepted without change. We have April 12th,
All in favor.
and this one we can't do. This is you and me, but we don't have John. And February 8th, Jeremy, just a question. You are not listed. You are listed as excused
I am?
in the heading, but you're voting. You were in fact here, were you not?
I was, as far as I know. Yes.
Yeah, this was the deck on the back of that house up on Hickory Hill. It's kind of on the back and the left, and we're going to be doing some screening. Any corrections here?
No.
Beyond the fact that
That I was,
Ed, on this one, the February 8th, Jeremy is listed as excused in the heading. So if you would just correct that to put him in the present area.
I may have been vacant, but I was here.
And on January 11th, we have the same issue. Paul, you voted, but are not in the present category. Did you?
Yeah, I was there.
You were there for this application.
Yes.
Okay, so with that correction, just adding Paul to the present category, up in the heading.
And April continuing?
Yes, April will do next time. So just doing all in favor of those corrections?
I accept, except if I wasn't there.
Okay, terrific. Okay, the first item on our agenda is 289 Clinton Avenue, and this is for asking for variances to construct 3 different types of fences. Who will be speaking on this application? If you'd go over to the microphone and give us your name, address, and then
I'm Mark Silverman, 289 Clinton Avenue in Doxbury.
Yes. Could you just for the folks at home, could you just give a quick description of what you're asking for?
Right, my wife and I would like to install a fence around our backyard. And the fence that, in our area, we have a tremendous number of deer, and we like to do planting. So we like to install a fence that's taller than the standard village code. How much of the description would you like?
I think that's probably enough. The one question I had was, I couldn't tell from the drawings and from the site visit, the attractive metal fence that you proposed, that will be alongside the driveway that goes back to your neighbor's house.
Yes.
And then where does it connect to the deer fencing that's in the back there?
So the north side of the property, that
Yeah.
goes straight back all along the north side of the property. And then at the corner there, that would connect to the deer fencing. There's wood.
Oh, so it directly connects to that,
Yes,
to the
that
deer
line
fence
would be
on that
intersected.
line? Okay, because that was the only thing I was worried that it would, that the cyclone fencing would be making that right turn if the right turn were too close to the driveway.
Right, so yeah, they'd be the entire side that abuts my neighbor's very long driveway would be that aluminum style fencing.
Right,
And then the east side, where it turns the corner along, that's a wooded area.
right, yes, and that's really screened from view.
And then when it comes back on the other side, that also would be the deer fencing, because that's a wooded area.
Right,
And then when it comes back to the house on the south side of the property, we actually had a stone base with a decorative fence on top
Right.
of that, because that's the most.
right,
visible
that fits with the front of the house.
It matches. the
Yes,
house.
yeah.
Any other questions?
Anyone else have questions on this?
Do you have any information about other fences of the same height in that area?
Yeah, so the Cooper's house is just, well, the north side of my property abuts a driveway, and then on the other side of the driveway is the Cooper's house. So they put the exact same type of aluminum fence.
Yeah, we approved that, that's the one we approved
Yeah.
maybe
And I thought that
9 months ago.
for my neighbors, the Jagers, who have the very long driveway, it would be kind of nice for them to have this matching fence on
Matching
both
fence
sides.
on each
We
side.
like the aesthetics of it also, so for those two reasons, it seems like a reasonable choice. There are several houses on my street where they put the same style 8-foot aluminum fencing. That area of Dobbs Ferry has larger lots, and it seems to look nice and goes well with the neighborhood.
Just notices.
Oh, yeah, Brian, do we have notice? They don't come back to us
Yes,
anymore.
we have the affidavit of notice.
Okay, terrific.
We sent the letters out, actually, all of my adjacent neighbors have spoken to me directly and talked about the plans, and everyone seems on board.
Okay, great. Move to close. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard on this application? Move to close? All in favor? I move that the application be granted in conjunction with the plans and fence styles submitted.
Yeah, and I just want to comment that I'm going to vote for it, but my decision is, just to be clear, it's largely because of the configuration of this particular, piece of land and how it relates to the neighbors, and that I don't see it as detracting from anybody else's, backyard or view or anything like that. Were that not the case, I, would have a different view of it. But, so I'm prepared to vote.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, good luck to you.
All right, thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Next item on our agenda is 7 Forkland Lane, and this is plans to construct a 60-foot high amateur radio antenna in the backyard. Who'll be speaking here?
Good evening, Alan Kestenbaum. On behalf of Spur, who's here present. I want to thank you for the time.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And I did provide for you an outline of what our intentions are with respect to the finding of the building inspector. Essentially, he relied upon the wireless and transmission services facilities code, and that does not apply to amateur radio operators. So those objections obviously can't really be used. Moreover, what I provided you with was a memorandum in number 7, which shows what the relevant case law is regarding ham radio or amateur radio antennas and structures. At a minimum, a village who has such a regulation must provide some reasonable accommodation to the amateur radio operator. You can see just in the last 2 weeks why amateur radio operators are so important in our nation. When you talk about the hurricanes that happened in the South, part of the communication system that was being used was ham radio operators. And not only that, it goes back to 9/11. Hams were used during 9/11. They've been recognized by our federal government as being a very important part of our federal communication system. And so much so that villages who have attempted to stop the erection of ham radio antennas have not only been found in violation of federal law, but have paid the attorney's fees for the ham radio who took it to court. So it is something that has been litigated before, has been in our courts over and over again. And under these circumstances, the village should have made some form of reasonable accommodation. Now, when you talk about our particular request for a 60-foot antenna, well, he's had a 40-foot antenna since he moved in 1989. So we're looking for 20 more feet. And why are we looking for that feet? Because that's the minimum height at which he can get effective communication. At the height he's at now, with the onslaught of electronic devices, that antenna band has a lot of interference. And so we have to move higher. And I've given you some explanation of that in my papers. I've given you the site plan. I've given you the other information you need in making your decision. I know it's not an easy decision to come to. I know most people do not like the aesthetics of an antenna going up. But the federal government has found that the benefits of having amateur radio operators outweigh the problems with aesthetics in the community.
Excuse me, could I just ask a couple mundane questions? First of all, is the site plan doesn't seem like it's not very clear from the site plan that you provided what this is going to be like visually and how it relates. You speak somewhere about how it's there'll be taller trees that mask it to some extent. But can we? Is there any? Do you have any visual presentation you can make so that we understand that?
You want me to provide you with pictures, satellite picture of?
Well, I mean, and just, you know, how the placement you're proposing for the antenna relates to the rest of the property and to neighboring properties.
I can certainly provide that to you. You know, involve getting a satellite photo of the internet is the best we can do with something like that.
Yeah, right. Actually, I'm interested more in street level. You know, in other words, what the visual will be.
What would you see as a result of the erection of this? Not much more than you see now. It's the same thing. It might be a little higher, but there is a tower there now.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is along the same lines, but a little bit different. I'm interested in the safety aspects. And when I went on Google Earth and tried to measure, it seemed to me that even if this were butting against the house, which to me struck me as the safest place, I wasn't sure that, 66 feet would be far enough away from other people's houses if it came down, or if there's a, is there a break point in these things so that when they go down, they break in half?
No, and I do have that information, maybe I should have provided for you, I don't know if you wanted it, but I do
Yeah.
have information from the company that builds these, and the way they break is they fold in so that it comes down in a limited area around you. Also, they are made to withstand winds up to 185 miles an hour. I believe that's what it said. Designed for a basic, well, I'd have to translate it. It's a wind speed of 80 miles an hour with a quarter-mile radial ice. And that's based upon the Electronics Industry Association standard. But I could get something more detailed for you from the company who makes this. That's something that would help your decision. But these do not topple over. That's not how these are made. They're made to sort of buckle. In here it says, the tower is most likely to buckle at the location of the highest combined stress ratio location in the upper half of portion of the tower below the failure location. This in turn would result in collapse of the ground within a radius of 1/3 of the tower height from the base of the tower. Okay, so that would be 22 feet. And I have this here. I can provide it to you tonight or tomorrow, whatever you'd like.
Yeah, I would think we would need a copy of that for our
Sure,
files.
Absolutely.
I think what you're failing to address, though, you talk about the ham radio, and our code doesn't, it's excluded, so it's already within there. So, your argument about that, I don't think is really on point. We have a 60-foot, you have a 60-foot antenna that you want to put up, and you haven't addressed with the site plan or its location, its site, and the fall zone, which is something that the building inspector also commented on, the safety condition. So you haven't put before us anything about the safety of this and what would happen. You're saying what the fall zone would be, but we don't have a site plan. We don't have a visual from the street. We're not looking for a satellite image from Google.
Yeah.
We're looking for a visual from the street and what would the fall zone be and a statement as to its safety factors.
Well, then what I would ask to do is to adjourn the matter, give me an opportunity to provide you with what you want, and we'll come back and look at it.
This is, again, I think maybe a practical suggestion if anyone else agrees with it. Assuming that we, agree with the law that you've presented, and we conclude that there's an obligation to try to accommodate it, to compromise. If we were to express a sense that that is likely, or that might be how we resolve this, would it make sense in terms of how to compromise for us to encourage some discussion with the building department and, with the understanding that the building department may very well, to comply with the law, need to compromise. You may also need to compromise. And I think if you went back with that, and made an effort to reach a compromise, we'd be in a different position. We would be able to have an articulated position by the building department. We offered this, but they wouldn't agree to it,
I understand, and that's what I'm trying to project, is that if there are reasonable requests like this gentleman just made with respect to the stress level, the fall zone, I have no problem in reasonably accommodating those requests, because that's part of, obviously, our obligation. If you have a concern, we want to address that concern. On the other hand, the part of the village is to also come back with a reasonable accommodation given the circumstances of this situation. Obviously, we want to work with the village. We don't want to work against the village. It's in everybody's best interest to come to an agreement that is one amicable.
One other thing I'd like to see, you mentioned that you have to go to 60 feet because.
66 feet.
66 feet. So I'd like to understand further why. You're saying you have to go above a height. Why isn't there more powerful antennas that you can use at 40 feet or some other difference? There may be literature that you could provide to
Sure.
Mr. Manley that could be reviewed before it comes back to us, also with regard to the structural setup and its site location.
Yes, I could. Yeah, I could. It has to do with the bands, but I'll give you some literature on that will explain.
And, in terms of safety for the neighbors, while our code, I believe, is the reason why you had the tentative base of this 20 feet off the house.
23,
If, or,
20 feet over.
if for safety reasons of neighbors, it should be abutting the house. I think we'd be amenable to variances needed for the safest position as opposed to the position that might be mandated by our code.
Different
Yeah.
options in terms of that.
Yeah.
See where it falls out. Given the letter from the manufacturer showing what the falls over would be.
Yes. And if you could just diagram that out on the
Yes.
plot plan,
You got it.
because that will make it easier for simpletons to understand what it really looks like, because we have to do this in context of the neighbors.
Okay.
Do we, I think, do we have power to remand it back to him for him to review what they submit and then make a new determination? I think so.
I think it would always be out of his hands. I think we have to make it
Well, but
because.
we could ask for his recommendation, to
Okay.
work something out and then he
Yeah.
can make a recommendation.
Does that make sense, Ed?
You want to throw it up to the?
Yeah, I'd take a look at.
To
the submittal.
have you guys work together and find something that
You
looks like it's
can
amenable.
let us know what you're able to agree about and, what's still in
Yeah, it was-
dispute.
Was my request to see the falls on it as well, and I believe that the first submittal was 60 feet, now you're saying
I'm not-
66,
It-
but,
The support structure, the tower is 60 feet, but of course, that's not the antenna goes above it.
The antenna's another 6
It
feet.
needs to be at a minimum 66-foot height, because that presents a half wavelength of frequency in use.
So the structure is 60 and then the antenna would be another 6, what it's saying.
all right, so we'll try to work something out and come back
Hmm.
here.
Do you want to put it off for a particular date, or you want to work out something and then see if we can put it on for a date?
I think we should continue it to next month's meeting, and in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
meantime, we'll discuss.
What we would do is we would leave this open, subject to other people who want to be heard.
And are we,
You'd come back.
Are we on firm ground with the noticing, with it having been 60 feet when it really is 66? Large is large in my
Right.
eyes, but I'm not a lawyer. Any thoughts,
That's
Darius?
an argument that someone could make, so maybe it should be renoticed for 66.
Is there anybody here?
Is there anyone,
Although the antenna is not technically part of the structure, it's on the structure.
The
The
height
structure is a
66.
60-foot structure.
It's a 60-foot structure.
Yeah, but it goes up 6 more feet.
is
That-
there anyone
yeah,
else
that
who'd
seems
like
like
to be
a
heard on this
difficult distinction.
application? No, that's good. There was an intimation that the current antenna has been safely operated without issues with neighbors. And, I think that,
If I make a comment,
if you'd come up and give us your name for the record, and,
Sure, I'm Alan Berg.
yes, Alan.
The current tower which is there, which is 40 feet high, actually has a 10-foot mast coming out of it. The antenna is approximately 5 feet above the top of the tower, so it's about 45 feet, but the top of the mast is about 10 feet above that for a total of 50 feet. Yet, the original permit that I got for that was just for a 40-foot tower, and there was nothing related to the antenna.
Question, the current mast that you have, will that be similar to the one that will be installed, or will that be more antenna-like?
It will be very similar.
It'll be similar,
Very
okay,
similar.
okay, thank you.
In fact, the way I think about it is the higher the antenna goes up, the less it's within the visual field of view, because people normally don't walk around looking like that.
How high is it total? Is there a mast on this one too? Is it 66 plus 10?
Yeah, that's what the extra 6 feet is.
It's 60 plus 6, which is the level of the antenna on the mast. And
may be.
But you should notice it for 66, I would.
Yeah, just, we've got time.
And the next
you know.
meeting is, I'm sorry?
Second Wednesday of the month.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
One other thing, not that I have any doubt about it, but I think Mr. Berg's license should be part of the application.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and the next item on our agenda is 89 Beechdale Road. And this is an appeal, to appeal the determination of the building inspector that pre-existing lot does not conform to current zoning standards and will require 2 variances. Who will be heard in this application?
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Adam Weichstein, partner in Hopperman, Porterell, and Weichstein, attorneys for the applicant. We have, as you're aware, maybe much to your chagrin, put in a written submission, asking for an interpretation that in fact we comply with lot width and that we comply with frontage. We've argued that extensively. I'm not going to go into that because it's very complicated unless the board has questions on that. But one thing I would say about that is we think the issue of lot width can be judged right on the language of the ordinance itself. We don't have to go much further. It may not be a model of wonderful draftsmanship, but the provision in question which sets forth the lot width says you must consider the greater of the minimums in tables B1, B2, or the minimum specified in B3. To me, it's very clear. It's a choice of column A or column B, or column C. If you think it's ambiguous and you don't think my interpretation is correct, I believe you still have to go with me under all of the applicable case law, which says if there's an ambiguity in the zoning ordinance, it must be construed in favor of the property owner and against the municipality which has enacted it. In this case, if we go to table B3, the applicable lot width, minimal lot width for a lot of this size is 100 feet. We have 110 feet. That's all I'm going to say on the interpretation unless you have questions. The variance.
I'm just confused about one thing.
Yes.
It's the greater, assuming we accept your reading, which is obviously very controversial here tonight. But if we accept your reading, the greater, isn't the greater 125 feet?
The greater of tables B1 and tables B2 is 125 feet, but it says the greater of B1 or B2 or the minimum specified in B3. So the answer is it's
I
either
see.
100 or 125
The way you read it, okay.
But to read it that way, you have to have a comma before or the B3.
I don't believe so. I think if you have that first word in there.
I'll tell you the problem I have with reading it that way, and it's no one's fault that this is written the way it is.
It is someone's fault.
It's someone's fault, but no one here, I hope, unless, is it, because table B1 applies to certain zoning districts, and B2 is an entirely different set of zoning districts. So there's no reason to make a choice between, it's sort of irrelevant which is greater. I'm just trying to follow, why do you think the drafters of this would ask you to make a decision about which of those numbers is greater when any particular property is in only one district?
But it would seem that, just to clarify, it would seem that B1 and B2, you're choosing between those, and then B3, that's a separate table.
That's what I believe.
That's your argument,
Yeah,
right?
well, B3 is different inherently because B3 is a sliding scale based on lot size, which the other ones aren't. That's why it's treated different. by the
But
rest.
can-
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, otherwise B3 goes away in many instances.
But can you think of a scenario where there would be a question about whether table B1 or table B2 applies to a particular property?
I can't standing here right now. That question frankly didn't occur to me.
All right, we'll ponder it some more later. So you,
Okay, so orally, I'd like to address the variance. As the board is well aware, the standard under village law is a weighing of the benefit to the applicant against the detriment to health, safety, and welfare of the community. Considering the 5 subsidiary factors in making that determination, we believe it's pretty clear here that there's a tremendous benefit to the applicant that he or it is seeking to achieve in this case, and that without the variance or without your giving us a favorable interpretation of frontage and lot width, this lot is unusable, period. End of story. You cannot get into or out of a lot, and you don't have a lot whose configuration meets the zoning. We don't believe, conversely, that there's any detriment to the neighbors, to the health, safety, and welfare of the community, or to physical and environmental conditions. This is a lot, it's not a small lot that's tucked away, it's 75% bigger than the minimum lot size in the district. It complies with all of the zoning requirements, other than, assuming our interpretation's wrong, other than lot width, which is a 10-foot deviation, 15-foot deviation under the interpretation of the building inspector, and the width of the frontage. In many of these instances, such as rear and front yard setback, lot depth, coverage, it's vastly in excess of what's required. It's further away from any of the surrounding lot system, and is required in many instances by a factor of 2 or 3. So we're not talking about shoehorning in a house on an undersized lot and trying to fit something there that doesn't belong. We don't think it has an undesirable impact on the neighborhood or environmental conditions. Also, it's adding one single family to a neighborhood in which single family homes are allowed. There's nothing to indicate what's proposed is a bad character of the neighborhood. It is, as you know, a variance for a single family home with type 2 action under SECRA, for which no environmental review is required. And there's at least some presumption that it's not going to have a significant environmental impact. The planning board has already granted site plan approval on this, and in doing so, they reviewed plans addressing stormwater management, sediment erosion control, landscaping and planting, visual impacts of the sky plane. The criteria on which they granted site plan approval include things such as pedestrian and traffic safety, such as avoidance of citing the improvements on environmental features to the maximum extent possible. Again, erosion and stormwater control. And they looked, if they followed their criteria, which I assume they did, at the adequacy of screening, noise, light, and sound attenuation. So this isn't coming to you on a blank slate. To the extent it can be argued, or would be argued, that it's inconsistent with the character, the AHRB has also approved the plans for this house, the plans which you have in front of you. So they have also made a finding that it's not too similar or dissimilar to the surroundings to have any impact on the area. We submit, there are no other means to achieve the benefit being sought. That's the next criteria. You either have frontage or you don't. You either have a sufficiently wide lot or you don't. It's not even a situation where you could buy land from a surrounding landowner. All the surrounding landowners are opponents of the application. So it's not practical. It's not necessary. It's not reasonable. We don't think that certainly, as I mentioned, I alluded to briefly before, we don't believe the lot of the variance is substantial. The other variance from 25 to 15 feet, I wouldn't want to argue one way or the other about that, but certainly the lot width is not substantial. And we don't believe the hardship is self-created. I mean, this certainly was purchased at a point when the regulations that are in effect today were in effect. We understand that. But we also understand that there's a history that was set forth in the interpretation argument where the planning board and the town board immediately after passing this provision that we're talking about, approved a subdivision and a site plan would be this parcel and what I call a Paluso parcel, one of the properties represented by Mr. Nerzi on behalf of the project opponents, literally within a few months after this legislation. So somebody thought it was okay. There were no variances there. And I'd say beyond that, when the planning board was considering this and the opponents raised the argument about the sufficiency of frontage, the response from the planning board's consultants was, this is a grandfather lot. So I would submit there was a real firm basis for my client to believe they did not need variances. I don't think they did, but even if they were wrong, I would argue it's not self-created. And finally, in any case, in accordance with the case law I've been to, and the statute, even if it were self-created, it really isn't a basis by itself or a strong basis for denial. I thank you. Does anyone have a question?
Just one question. So one of the tests is whether or not the benefit can be achieved by any other method. So you've made a conclusory statement that it's unusable, but what else do we have to say that it can't be used? Some other configuration.
We don't own any surrounding lands. We don't have any easement rights in other properties other than what's in the strip. So unless we have access to the property for vehicles, we have nothing. If we don't have 15 feet of frontage and you don't give us a variance, we just don't have any viable lot.
Should we see if anyone else? Thank you. Is there someone else who'd like to be heard?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Peter Nerzia. I represent the owners of 87 Beachdale, 91 Beachdale, and 200 Judson Avenue, the adjoining neighbors of the applicants. I submitted a letter earlier today to Pat Hardy in the building office. I believe you have copies of them. You may not have had a chance to review them. I just want to quickly summarize some points and then really jump to the heart of the matter, which I think is the most important aspect here. Regarding the interpretation regarding the variance, excuse me, the interpretation on the width of the lot, opposing counsel had stated what he thought the correct interpretation of that code section should be. We could bang our heads against the wall trying to figure all that out. My only comment here is that absent clear and convincing evidence on what the board had intended in that language, then I think it's somewhat of a slippery slope to assume what they intended. And the only thing I just want to point out on that is in the code, section 300-9, which is rules of construction, subsection 11B, and I'll just read this off, it's a very short sentence, states the following, when we're dealing with rules of construction. Or, in parentheses, indicates that the enacted items or provisions may apply singularly or in combination. So that's the official rationale of how the word "or" should be construed. Quite honestly, I don't know if that definition helps or hurts anybody over here. We can go crazy trying to interpret and decipher all of that.
Well, what's your position on if a provision is ambiguous, it being interpreted most favorably to the applicant and not to the village?
Well, my opinion, my client's contention would be if there's an ambiguity on what the drafters of this code section and what this section that I just read off really meant, then
No, that wasn't the question, no.
Well, I think you started off by acknowledging there's some ambiguity. So, assuming that we think so too, how does that affect our interpretation?
Well, that the interpretation should not be granted in favor of the applicant that the variance request proceed, specifically in regards to the lot. That's the question of the lot, it's just a question of the definition or the interpretation of that. On a more substantive note, the things that I wanted to point out, just to add some context to the letter that I sent earlier, are as follows.
Yeah, you should go over the key points because while Darius saw it earlier in the day, we arrived just before 8.
Sure.
And it's a lot to go through.
Sure. Regarding the question about the frontage on the access strip, the situation is that 89 Beachdale has a 15-foot access strip. The owner of 89 is contending that he is eligible for the exception to the frontage requirement. In other words, he's got less than 25 feet, he's got a 15-foot strip, that he could use another party's access strip and qualify as an exception and not be required to get a variance for the access strip. Our contention is as follows. Regarding that access strip, that was essentially a situation that was created in the 1988 subdivision. What I think is instructive and important here is that the facts subsequent to 1988 are relevant. Specifically, there was a subdivision in 2004, and also there was a private driveway agreement filed in 2004. That private driveway agreement was between the owners of 87 Beachdale, 91 Beachdale, and 200 Judson, and also 89 Beachdale as well. But the significance of that driveway agreement is that the true facts on the ground, so to speak, are that that private driveway situation is the only method of ingress and egress to all of those houses or to all of those lots. So if I may bring these to you, this is a copy of a tax map for of 89 Beachdale. It's highlighted in yellow. What I wanted to point out is that after you've had a chance to take a look at it, the access, well, the lot is completely highlighted in yellow. The main portion of the lot along the access strip. But the gray section along the yellow access strip is actually the driveway, private driveway that serves all 4 lots. Now, the significance there is that you've got one driveway servicing everybody on that section, in that section there. Or the dimensions of that private driveway are specified in that driveway, the private driveway that I alluded to before. It's a 15-foot wide private driveway servicing 4 properties. Now, if any of the board members have not gone to that street.
I see 3 houses.
Yes, those
Could
are
you-
the current existing 3 houses there, and then.
And which is the 4th property?
The one that's highlighted in yellow. That would be 89 Beachdale, was highlighted in yellow.
So they were part of the agreement?
Yes. But if the members have not gone to that street, I would strongly encourage you to go there. Again, it's a 15-foot strip that serves everybody. The owner of 89 is basically stating that he should be entitled to the exception to the street frontage requirement. In other words, the situation is such that he should be entitled to have an approval based upon the fact that he's got a 15-foot strip, that there's an adjoining 15-foot strip. Each of those 2 strips serves 2 properties. I would prefer to review it or look at that in a slightly different, from a slightly different angle. What we have here right now is one 15-foot strip, and by the way, that 15-foot strip does not match the original contours of any subdivision map. For some reason, it's developed differently. But the current access strip serves all four properties, or would, in essence, if the approval was granted, serve 4 houses. The question becomes, from a safety standpoint, I think this is really the crux of the matter, that the applicant was stating that the benefit in improving outweighs any detriment. But that detriment, I think, is a safety question. 4 houses, well, there are 3 obviously in front of me, but a 4th house would be part of a 15-foot wide strip, driveway strip. Is that 4th approval the straw that breaks the camel's back? Obviously, we have 3 houses here right now, but,
Are you sure it's safe now?
well, I can't comment on whether there have been any fender benders or close calls or anything like that, but the obvious question is adding one more house to the situation, what effect will that have? Now, I reviewed the planning board file several months ago. I didn't see anything in there specifically regarding this question. I don't know if there was a traffic consultant or a safety engineer who was retained to issue an opinion, but I think.
Well, that is the purview of the planning board,
Yeah.
you know, issues of safety.
But I think that should be also considered by this board that, again, 4 houses or potentially a 4th house, a 15-foot wide access strip, what's the impact on safety? And that is clearly a major concern for my clients on adding one more house or increasing the density of the usage of that access strip. So there's a strong concern that question be delved into and answered with as much information as possible. To that effect, what I would respectfully request of this board is to keep this meeting open and conclusively get an answer on that safety question, which I think the only way to conclusively get an answer on the safety question is to get a third-party opinion on what's the effect of additional usage on that access strip. In addition,
Is it possible that the parties you represent would share the cost of that with the applicant?
Yeah, because we're not really sure it's safe today, are we?
well, I'm not aware of there having been any accidents or fender benders or anything like that. I could inquire to see if there have been. I'm not aware of any. But I can tell you that increasing the usage increases the risk.
Okay, are there any other issues you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, just a couple of points, one or two points, I suppose. I understand what the applicant has stated in the fact that if he cannot get approval, what needs to happen at that point. And he's gone over it in detail in his letter and in his presentation earlier about the 5-part test. I'm not going to get into the minutiae of all that, but my comment, I suppose, is this. If the applicant is in a position where, should there be a denial, then the applicant is left with an unusable lot, my comment is this. The applicant, or the open party who's going to be living there, purchased this lot without full approvals in place. Now, I understand sometimes that's how it goes in a real estate transaction, but until approvals are completely in place, there's a risk that something could go awry. I don't think this board or any board should be in a position to be an insurance policy should something go wrong. So I think the point is that I encourage the board to look into that safety issue. If that means holding the meeting open until there's a third-party opinion on that, I encourage the board to go into that path. Should there be any other issues raised here that would be relevant to the planning board? Again, planning board started first, not here. I would encourage, or I would recommend that the planning board have a say in this also, should this board approve variances.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean about suggesting the applicant should have gotten an approval in advance of the purchase, because we're not allowed to consider an application by someone who doesn't own the property or have a contract to purchase the property.
Well, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe it's section 352 states that an application should go simultaneously to the planning board and the zoning board. You can't come out and line with directly with the planning board without these issues being resolved. But I think the proper protocol for administration of the application would have been zoning board, then planning board, not the other way around. So to that extent, I think would be beneficial if approvals are granted here. Should the planning board have any further questions or comments on the application, look at the standing forward or time to loose ends at that point.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard on this application?
I have one other question, just for the applicant, just going back to the frontage access.
Yes.
I'm not sure how, before we get to the question of whether there should be a variance, but just applying the building department's interpretation as to how you bring it back to a pre-September 15th, 1987 date with what was submitted to us. Could you just go through your argument just as to why you don't think it requires a variance? I'm sure that I'm getting that.
I mean, as to the configuration you're talking about?
Just the frontage access issue.
Well,
You're saying there's no variance required.
there are a few reasons for that. I think the most important one is, number one, there are 4 criteria that are in the code section. It has got planning board approval. I believe it was a lot that predated or was re-subdivided after that September 15, 1987 date. And that's shown by the fact, number one, that the deed description in 1985 and today are identical to our property. It's shown by the fact that on the tax map designation, on the most recent tax map, which are our lot, are identical to those which were in the resolution of the zoning board that was put out 2 months after the law was changed that September. So it was a November date. So unless someone says that the tax map was changed radically in that month and a half, that hasn't changed. So the lot's the same. We have right after the law was amended in 1988 to put in this exception that we're talking about from the 25-foot frontage to require an access strip. We have the planning board looking at it and saying 15-foot strip from our lot and a 15-foot strip from what I call a Caluso lot, I guess it's lot C on that subdivision, form the access strip, and we're granting you subdivision approval. No variance, and they go beyond that because they say that our parcel has a right of access over his client's parcel, down that strip. It's a note on the plat, on that 1988 plat, which is exhibit,
Where is that?
exhibit 8, which is building. So, those, I believe, are the items that show that we granted site plan approval for this lot because the driveway was in excess of 200 feet for this lot and the neighboring lot to allow that subdivision to actually have access to that frontage. So to me, that is very strong evidence that when the board, which enacted legislation within 8 months, gives an approval saying that the subdivision is as of right, that's a strong indication to me that it met those frontage requirements as was intended by the town board. And that's the way the planning board understood it too.
I don't know if the planning board's interpretation is binding on us, but
It is not, and I'm not sure I can say the town board's is at this point after all these years either, but I do believe it's very persuasive evidence. You're the ones who get the ultimate say.
any other questions? Close the hearing or anybody else?
Yeah, why don't we close the hearing? Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard before we close the hearing?
May I make just one final comment?
Sure.
We believe strongly that when you're talking about one house in a subdivision that was already approved to have 4 lots have access over this, whether we comply strictly with the frontage or not, having a traffic study is so out of proportion with what we're asking to do that we request that you reject that request. Thank you.
Move to close? All in favor? Unanimous? What's the best way to?
I personally think, assuming you're going to be looking to Jeremy and I a little bit to kind of read through everything that we've gotten,
Do you want
I would like a little more time myself to read through everything. I've had an opportunity to read the documentation, not fully the letter that, came in tonight, but there's a legal
Yeah, we have to
interpretation
do
with
a
respect to the
statutory
determination. And then obviously there's the balancing test that we have to all apply. But I think unless there's some urgency, I would recommend that we hold over to give us a further opportunity to review the information that has been provided to us. I do have one question that I may want to pose to council based on the information that came to us, and go from there.
And if you want to discuss, if I may, Mr. Chairman, this with me, we can do that now, we can do it offline, we can do it in private session, for the legal issues, if you desire.
We're not allowed to-
I think everyone should read
No,
the
just wondering if you
materials
have or
first.
not.
Yeah,
No, I think it's more as the frontage issue, just a couple of questions.
I guess from my perspective, there's some history here, and that is this applicant has been bounced around forever. I guess what I think might make sense would be to adjourn for a little bit, do 127 Hilldale, come back and read this thoroughly, and then talk among ourselves, and if we feel we're in a position to make a decision, then we'll make a decision tonight. Does that,
I'm fine with that.
does that seem like a good approach?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, my perspective, yes, I
Yeah,
can do that.
yeah, and,
Yeah, I wasn't sure you were asking me, Chairman. We'll tell you.
oh, we always value your, no, you're here because we want to make sure that we do things properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we'll adjourn this for a little bit, and we'll call 127 Hilldale. This is plans to construct a 2-story addition on the rear side of their house, is set back 8 foot 3 inch from the property line, whereas the minimum allowable is 10 feet, seeking a variance of 1 foot 9 inches. The new deck is on the left side of the house, is set back 6 feet 5 inches from the property line, whereas the minimum allowed is 10 feet, and therefore a variance of 3 foot 7 inches is required. Who will be heard in this application?
My name is Shaheen Ishmat. I live at 127 Hillsdale Road. Be any good saying anything. The existing house is non-conforming. Existing non-conforming according to the setback. The building alongside the existing house, which is extending where the walls of the existing house is. Therefore, our addition will be non-conforming to That's the reason we, so you could make the right-hand side extension, the right-hand side extension 10 feet setback. But if you look at the floor plan, it would be a big jog in the bedroom.
Right.
After all the expenses that the owners is spending, I don't think they would like that, you know, having a big jog in the bedroom because of setback. So,
And it's a more attractive presentation on the outside to extend the nonconformity rather than to jog, and you'd still be nonconforming, but the addition would be more conforming. But, so there's very little benefit.
And on the deck side, on the left-hand side, there's no alternative because there's a garage door. If you look at the plan, there's a garage door, we cannot put the deck post in further than that. The existing deck is also 6'5" We're just building it exactly as right now.
Yeah, and with the addition, it in effect makes the deck, gives the neighbors more privacy from the deck.
Makes it more pleasant to look at.
Right. Does anyone have any questions on this application? You good? Okay.
Move to close the hearing?
Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard on this application? Move to close? All in favor?
Thanks so much.
Okay, good luck to you.
We didn't vote to approve.
Yeah.
Oh,
Move to approve.
right, to approve based on the plan submitted with the application. So if you decide to change anything, you've got to come back to this board. But, so you're bound by building to these plans. All in favor? Aye. We're good. Okay, why don't we put our time in back on Hilldale, Beechdale?
party to the agreement, so I don't know how he gets an easement, so I was just about to look. So that was my question. Are you there?
It was owned by one person.
So,
Gutflesh.
but would they have an easement? It was Gutflesh's property, I remember the Gutflesh's
Yeah.
house.
The easement, I don't think that's in contention, if I'm right, Mr. Nerdy, the easement applies to both, does apply to this lot to gain access.
That's what I was about to look at. Do they have would they have an easement over the property? It's just a maintenance agreement, basically, that you'd have to?
You're referring to that private
Yes.
driveway agreement? Well, that affects the three houses, and you also, one of the prior owners also owned the vacant lot, which is now 89. So that party signed off as the owner of the vacant lot and the other house that he owned.
That's not in contention. This lot has access to it via the easement. Assuming they have whatever frontage or width or whatever, but the easement is in existence. I don't think that's in contention at all.
That's in that.
Okay. That make sense?
Yep. So.
So how is this
Gutflesh
relevant?
owned this property, right, so.
How is the easement relevant?
How is I mean, this is a maintenance easement.
The one that, the recent letter?
Yeah, right? I mean, this is a maintenance agreement across the private road.
So it also gives
It's a shared-
access.
It's a shared driveway and a maintenance agreement,
Yeah.
about the maintenance of the driveway.
It gives people access to go and also who's gonna maintain it. I think they share the percentage, I think.
Yeah, there's a percentage, there's a calculation.
But it does give them access to the lot.
As does the 1988 subdivision.
Yeah, I mean-
Which gives us access over this land's property, over the
Yeah.
entire 32.
They cleaned it up in '04. In '04, there was a re-subdivision of this area. Polson submitted a subdivision, there were a couple of plans to even develop more lots back there.
Well, that was my next question. Is that a fifth lot that's been subdivided?
That fifth lot, which is this lot here,
29.2.
correct. That lot was on the subdivision in '04. It's a non-building lot as of now, unless they come back to the village for site plan approval.
So it would be, the board would have to give site plan approval, or the planning board?
Planning board, right. And there may be, I don't know if there's access or width, I haven't studied that lot in detail in terms of width, frontage, all that thing, or else. That was the result of many, many years of litigation too. It has that too.
But Darius, you know, we discourage creating flag lots now, but these have been in existence for a long, long time. You know, it seems to me that everyone has access. If you have the lot, you in effect have access.
Correct, that's right. I would agree with that.
Guys, what's the best way to approach this? I guess to me, I don't like the idea of overruling the decision of the building inspector, only from this standpoint. He is our safeguard. At the margin, he makes calls, brings them to us to safeguard the community. You know, and I feel that he's done his job here. I think I would, rather than overrule him, I would wonder, does it make sense to just start with, do we think this property should be granted variances? And be done with it. You know, we know that if you look at the code, if you want this to be a building lot, you can interpret it one way. And if you don't want it, you can interpret it another way. And you can debate ors and commas and all kinds of stuff, because quite frankly, it's poorly written.
I don't agree that it's poorly written, and actually, I do think you have to have a comma there, and I think it's properly interpreted by Ed, so.
I
think
agree
it
with
could
that.
be better drafting, but I still think as drafted, the determination that he made is correct. But that does mean that we have to jump to the balancing test, so I would hope my own vote would be on that particular variance to say that that was properly a requirement. I read the code as did Ed.
On the appeal, the interpretation.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I think that the provision is terribly worded, but it's not ambiguous, because there's only one reading of it that makes sense.
in the whole.
There's only, otherwise, it's sort of like an algebra equation. It makes no sense to say it's the greater of, you know, three different things. It's gotta be, and the only thing that makes sense, if you look at the table, there's a choice between B1 and B2. And, you know, either one or the other applies. So there's no reason, it couldn't be both. So the word greater has to apply to whoever, whichever of 1 and 2 is the applicable one. Then it's whether that's, and there is a possibility, because in B3, if it's a 40,000 square foot lot, then it needs to be a greater width. So there's a scenario where that makes sense. There's no scenario where the other interpretation makes sense.
What I would suggest maybe as a process is
Yeah.
that we take it
Vote
bit by
on
bit
that,
and
yeah.
vote on bit and bit. You guys can have your own interpretation of the language, but maybe we deal with the first question with regard to whether or not the building department properly determined that a variance was required with respect to lot.
Peter, I think your point, and just to give any guidance if you like it, I think your point was, let's not necessarily go there and make the rulings that the variance decision could potentially moot those issues of whether Ed was right or wrong. You're sort of saying, okay, let's assume he's right for a second and consider the variances instead of going into a big debate and, you know, the record.
Right.
You could do either one you want, but I just think maybe it could be smoother and simpler if you go the other way. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there for you to consider.
I still think for the record, we have to make a determination as to whether or not it was right or wrong before we jump, because we don't get to that unless we find that he was correct.
Yeah, and
Otherwise, we'll have to
if the people in opposition to this want to challenge what we're doing, they can say we had no authority to grant, you know, that we analyzed it the wrong way. And at any rate, I think, I'm prepared to rule that a variance is needed. So,
If that's a motion, I second.
with
respect to the lot.
I don't quite follow the argument on the frontage, but I think if we decide we need a variance on one, then we're gonna have to turn to variances. So, I would move to uphold the building department's, the position that a variance is required.
With
With
respect to
respect to
width.
width, yes.
second.
All in favor?
Just for the record, only on lot width for now.
Correct,
Okay,
this is only
okay,
lot width.
Just so we get
Yes,
that covered.
yeah, we're just trying to do step by step.
Do you want to deal with frontage or?
Well, no, because I mean, I think having said that, we now have to consider, you know, we couldn't
Right.
approve it without a variance now. Or deny it.
Right.
No,
I mean, to me, this is not a close call. I mean, this is, you know, a real good sized lot. It's oddly shaped. Lots of lots in Dobbs Ferry are oddly shaped. You know, the law is written for us to rule on. It's not a drop dead, you've got to have this, if other conditions would make it appropriate to make this large lot otherwise buildable. And so, you know, I would move to grant the with variance.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel the only real adverse effect that's been pointed out is concerns traffic. I think it's highly speculative, and I'm not convinced that adding one more building lot in this area is going to tip the balance in a meaningful way. So I would grant the variance.
I agree, and in that regard, you know, traffic and safety issues are very high on the planning board's mind. And if there were any question, I think they would have properly addressed it.
We do get to consider the detriment to the neighboring properties, so
Yeah.
that's part of
Yeah.
what we're allowed to.
Right.
That's so.
Right, but
it is
that's
within our
that's the
purview.
only detriment that was identified. So I move to approve the application for a variance
For width
to
variance.
permit.
For the two variances?
For the width variance.
Oh,
Right.
Well, yeah, well, that's what I was saying is.
oh, so I guess we do have
I-
to go back.
Yeah, I think we have to decide whether you need the frontage variance before you approve the
Okay,
wall.
yeah.
So,
Well,
so procedurally, we have to, what do you want to do with the frontage variance?
Why don't you take if you agree with Ed's interpretation, you can take a motion to agree with the interpretation on frontage, then move on to the variances for both. The balancing test that you just.
Right.
So once you do that, once you address the frontage in a motion.
I'll let you guys lead.
Can we just have a little
Sure.
private consultation?
Yeah.
All right, yeah, I would move to uphold the building department's determination that a frontage variance is needed on the, essentially on the theory that the evidence that's presented, that's been presented to us, has not convinced me and has not convinced the board that there should be an exception to the language in the code.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Now we get to go back to
All right.
testing.
As I said before, I was so rudely interrupted. I move to approve the two variances for the reasons we previously said.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you very much for the
That was amazingly quick.
I always love moving to moving to the Cape.
Yeah, but Ed's the one.
Sorry to make you,
Anyway, actually, in the end, I think it was a smart and beneficial thing not to